Like a standardized test, The Legend of Zelda begins with a choice that only has one right answer. While one might argue in the context of a game, a choice like this is useless, I think it teaches the player a very valuable lesson. From the moment the game begins, you are taught that your curiosity will be rewarded, and that no matter how many wrong answers you pick, there will always be a right one. This right here is The Legend of Zelda's biggest strength. It teaches you a lesson and sticks to it, insisting you treat its world with the same childlike wonder as a kid exploring the woods, wondering what's under every bush and behind every rock. In many other games, hiding secrets behind undistinguishable objects would be a flaw. If a player at some point finds a secret behind an ordinary rock, from that point on they'll be inclined to check behind every rock of the same type. By the time they're on their 20th and no treasure has been found, the sense of wonder that comes from hunting for secrets might turn into frustration. The Legend of Zelda manages to avoid this by limiting the player's ability to hunt these secrets down. Bombs are a limited resource, and the first candle players get can only be used once per screen. With these limitations, the game makes sure the player burns down bushes and blows up walls they are particularly suspicious of, rather than having them run around the map meticulously checking every single one. It then helps a lot that the secrets are usually hidden in those exact places players will be suspicious of, making sure everyone playing the game will find at least a few secrets naturally. Eventually, as the player explores the overworld and gets used to the game's controls and exploration loop, they'll find their first dungeon, and it's here I want to address The Legend of Zelda's interesting approach to accessibility. Some may hear me call The Legend of Zelda accessible and immediately think I'm crazy, but you need to remember game design sensibilities change, and what could have been considered accessible back then may not be now. A great example of this is the original Dragon Quest. The game was designed for the Famicom with the primary design goal of bringing the genre of computer RPGs to a wider audience. To accomplish this, the number of party members was reduced to just one. Stat points and spells were assigned and learned automatically, and the punishment for death was greatly reduced. Adding to this, players were also given a clear script/story to follow, where certain events were intended to be completed in a specific order. At the time, Dragon Quest was undoubtedly the most accessible RPG on the market, but at the end of the day, it's still an NES RPG from 1986, so it's far from what we would call accessible today. Like Dragon Quest, The Legend of Zelda attempted to bring more accessibility to the RPG genre. It removed EXP and stat points entirely and replaced the difficult-to-understand turn-based mechanics with a more familiar real-time combat system similar to other action games of the time. In fact, The Legend of Zelda removed so many of the management mechanics associated with RPGs, it practically pioneered a whole new genre, the one we now call the action-adventure game. While in so many ways it seems Zelda pushed accessibility much further than even Dragon Quest, there's one key area where it is arguably less accessible. You see, while Dragon Quest opted for linearity, removing a lot of the confusion of where to go next that was common in the genre, The Legend of Zelda takes a completely opposite approach. It attempts to remain accessible within non-linearity, creating both an accessible action game and RPG at the same time. Dungeons in The Legend of Zelda are numbered like levels in a regular action game, implying an intended order of completion for proper difficulty escalation. This is great as it communicates to the player whether they're ready to face the challenge ahead or if they should maybe explore a little bit before continuing. What makes it even better is levels don't have to be completed in that order, which is key to what makes the game's challenge so approachable. While in other games, being stuck on a level meant getting good or dropping the game entirely, in The Legend of Zelda, if a player were to find a level particularly difficult, there's nothing stopping them from leaving it, getting stronger, and coming back later. A good example of this is something that happened in my first playthrough. I got stuck in level 6, the one with all the whiz robes, and no matter how much I tried, I just couldn't get past this level. I decided to leave it and go try my hand at level 7, which I found to be much easier. Then, with the heart container I got after killing the boss of that level, I revisited a tomb I had found earlier in the playthrough containing a red sword. It seemed that the extra heart container had put me just at the minimum health requirement to grab that sword and get a huge boost in my damage. Along the way of doing all this, I collected a bunch of rupees, which I then was able to spend on a red potion, which allows me to heal my health fully twice. With all this equipment, I was able to go back to level 6 and easily complete it in one try. This kind of game design is something people typically associate a lot with stuff like Elden Ring, but The Legend of Zelda did this a whole 36 years before that. So I've spent the last few minutes going over The Legend of Zelda's extremely influential and revolutionary design, but that wouldn't really mean much if the game didn't feel good to play. Game feel is one of the most important things to any game, and Nintendo knows that better than anyone. I mean, they practically pioneered good game feel. There was no jumping game that felt better than Super Mario before Super Mario, but it's really sad to say The Legend of Zelda wasn't their strongest showing in this regard. Although I attribute that mostly to its age rather than the developers being bad programmers. The only game I can remember that attempts a gameplay style similar to Zelda before it is Hydlide, which yeah, it did it a lot worse. So Technically, The Legend of Zelda was the best playing game of this style at the time, but it would feel disingenuous to not bring up my criticisms considering many games released after improved greatly upon this gameplay, so there clearly were problems. For starters, movement isn't tied to a grid, which might not seem like a problem at first, but trust me, it is. Link's sword attack is a stab, which means it requires precision, something you won't have playing a game that doesn't lock your movements to predetermined spots with a D-pad. Future games in the series gave Link a wide swing, presumably to solve this exact issue, allowing the players to easily attack the enemies without needing a level of precision that is unattainable with the control scheme. Another game released afterward that solved Zelda's gameplay issues was Star Tropics, which also used an attack hitbox that is very precise, but it compensated for this by locking the player and enemies' movements to a grid, creating a much more strategic combat system that demands precision while also allowing it. It then doesn't help Zelda's case that enemies seem to be designed explicitly to demand precise movements, even more so than Star Tropics. Dark Nuts are the main culprit here. They can't be attacked from the front, but they move sporadically. Dealing damage to them means perfectly positioning yourself behind them or to one of their sides, poking them with a stab, and then extremely quickly moving out of the way in a manner that you can avoid their sudden change of direction. They are truly an infuriating enemy to fight that feel like they were designed for a game with a completely different movement system. The game also has quite the tendency to ramp up its difficulty in very artificial ways, mainly by taking enemies like the Dark Nuts Wiz ropes out of the rabbits and making them completely immune to Link's secondary combat items. I see no other reason they would do this other than to make the game artificially harder. I wouldn't even have complained about the Dark Nuts if they had just let me use the boomerang to stun them, or the magic rod or bow to attack them from a safe range. Instead, I'm forced to rely only on my sword, leaving all the other combat items you get as rewards for thoroughly exploring the dungeons relatively useless outside of the overworld. It's really disappointing because having these items be genuinely useful when fighting some of the harder enemy types would have served a great purpose, making the game's already pretty accessible form of progression even better, allowing you to find ways of increasing your odds of success that aren't just raising your stats or buying healing potions. This is an aspect where the series would suffer for a lot of entries to come, so the fact that this first game still somehow does it better than some of the future entries is something that makes me inclined to give the game a pass for this particular flaw. Something I won't give the game a pass on though is its finale. Throughout this review, I've neglected to mention the bosses at the end of each dungeon. They're pretty good, I suppose, nothing special. Most are just floating hitboxes that deal damage on contact. Some even spice it up by shooting projectiles, but overall, they're the least memorable part of the experience. Although it's very interesting to see the series' tradition of making items only really useful in a specific boss fight start as early as the first game. This game has a bow and well, it shoots arrows, but instead of having a separate arrow counter, basically each arrow costs 1 rupee. It's not a very useful item as rupees are an incredibly valuable resource early game, and by the time you no longer need that many rupees, most enemies you'll be fighting will be immune to the bow anyway. So of course, in order to give the players a reason to want the bow, 2 bosses are implemented that need it in order for them to be killed. The first is Goma, which if you're a fan of the Zelda series, you must know by now. Big spider with a weak point in his eye that can only be damaged by the bow. It's cool that this boss exists, it sets the foundation for what Zelda boss design will become many years later, but it's the second boss that uses this mechanic that is very, very disappointing. But before that, let's talk about the final level. Level 9 can only be properly entered once you've collected all 8 pieces of the Triforce, so it serves as a final gauntlet of sorts, and man, is it one hell of a gauntlet. This is how many rooms, not counting secret rooms, levels 1 through 8 have. That gives us an average of about 22 rooms per dungeon, which is pretty good. Not too daunting, but enough that they feel satisfying to explore. Wanna know how many rooms level 9 has? 55. A whole 55 rooms filled with the toughest enemies in the game, and the entire time you're hearing this. I haven't brought up the soundtrack in this video, mostly because it's barely there. The game only has 3 songs used during gameplay: the classic overworld theme, the dungeon theme, and the Ganon theme, which you already heard. While I can appreciate some themes like the overworld theme or the title theme for being iconic pieces of music that would be iterated upon for decades to come, and I'll never get over the fact that a 5-second jingle for an item ended up turning into one of the most nostalgic and recognizable gaming tracks in history, I can't underestimate just how repetitive this game's soundtrack gets. Look, I love the overworld theme as much as the next guy, but when it's the only thing you'll hear whenever you're outside of a dungeon, it's hard to not lose your mind, and I swear, getting lost in a dungeon in this game is a practice in psychological torment. It just keeps going and going, and it never stops. I'll be honest, most of my time with this game after the first few hours, I just put it on very low volume and listen to my own music in the background. Hell, sometimes I just raw dog it and not listen to anything at all. It can get pretty ear grating, but this is most certainly a limitation of technology at the time, so I won't hold it against the game too much. If you manage to stay sane while clearing this dungeon, you'll notice that not only is it massive, but it isn't all that simple to navigate either. It is as much a test of your navigational skills as it is your combat skills. I got lost in this thing for more than an hour and I started to lose my mind a little, not to mention if you make it here without collecting the lion key, you can straight up just get soft locked. Happened to me in my second playthrough and the only way to get out was to very slowly kill myself with the candle. Thankfully, with a little bit of patience and my father's help, I eventually made it to the end and... Yeah, this boss sucks. Okay, rewind. There are 2 hidden items in level 9. That's nothing new. Most dungeons have them. The thing is, one of these items isn't optional, the silver arrow. Remember when I said there were 2 bosses that you needed the bow to defeat? Well, yeah, this is the second one. Thankfully, I knew this already going in, so I was able to find it before facing off against Ganon. The thing is, this fight is just pretty fucking terrible, so Ganon goes invisible, and you just can't see him for like the entire fight. At first, I thought maybe I had to use the silver arrow and kept trying to hit him and, well, nothing happened. So I died and I made my way back to try again, and once again, nothing happened, except this time I was able to hit him with my sword at some point while running around and flailing mindlessly. I then kept trying to do that to no success and died again. Eventually I asked my dad to look it up, and yeah, that's kind of what you do. You mindlessly stab with your sword until you eventually hit him 4 times, after which he goes into a state of vulnerability and you can finally give the final blow. Yeah, remember the silver arrow? This is where you're supposed to use it. Imagine being a kid in the 80s who made it all the way here, got through this horrible boss after multiple grueling attempts, finally took him down, and then that fucking happened. Shit must have been tragic. I would never trust a video game again for as long as I lived. So that was a shitty way to wrap up the adventure, wasn't it? Man, for all the incredible things that The Legend of Zelda does, it is unbelievably flawed in so many core aspects. It's sad, really. I can definitely see how there could be a remaster of this game that touches it up just enough to be the timeless masterpiece it deserves to be. But for now, The Legend of Zelda is most certainly a masterpiece, but it's not timeless. Despite all my grievances with the game, the lacking moment-to-moment gameplay that frustrated me more often than not, I can't help but look back at my time with The Legend of Zelda fondly. It's like a camping trip with your family, right? The moment-to-moment of that trip might not be the best. Shitting in a latrine sucks, sleeping on the floor sucks, and getting bit by 100 mosquitoes is definitely not good, but after you're done and you look back at the trip, all you remember is that beautiful waterfall you found on a random afternoon, or that dumbass game you and your cousins played all day because all you had for fun was each other and a deflated soccer ball. A game like The Legend of Zelda isn't about the destination, and it isn't about the journey either. It's about the memories formed through overcoming adversity and exploring a brand new world.